Hello. If you found this, it's because I have put this on the internet. Um, basically, over the years when I've been in class or at free time, I've been just doodling all these little maps and all these little worlds, and I'm starting to forget them. So I'm going to try to make this bank in a way that I can always look back and kind of remember what I was thinking about. So this is one that I've been working on for a couple of years. I invented it back in high school calculus. I've been working on it ever since. And it doesn't really have a name, but the kind of main character, most developed country is Pentalia, which is this one up in the corner. And so I figured for this, it's the first video, first recording. So I'll just give a little world overview. So if I come back or if anyone wants to try to jump in, they can see the world as it was originally conceived because I've kind of developed the map before and after this moment. And this is just what I call, like present time. All right. So in the top corner, the most major country in this world is Pentalia, right? They are a French kind of based country, monarchy ruled by this family called the House of Aurelian, which is split into all these different branches. Um, and yeah, so I've only drawn two cities on this basic map, which are the capital of Pentalia and Amoria, which isn't that important of a city, but I'll kind of explain it later. And then New Delium is marked here. That is a ruined city that comes more into play when you talk about Old Delium. All right, so I guess I should establish a little backstory. I don't want to go too far into it, but the kind of original country in this, the oldest country here, is Delia. Delia is almost like the Rome, Greece analog. I've only used Greek names and Greek inspired cities and stuff for them, with a little Romans in the south in this area. But basically, they once ruled an empire which stretched from Goria all the way over here in the east, kind of curved around the coast to include all of these northern countries. And so when they started these countries, they established these several important cities, which I've kind of been back and forth on names for them. I used Free Cities for a while, but I feel like Free Cities is too generic a name in fantasy. So let's kind of left them nameless for now. But these are Brandica in the northeast, Amoria, which is the least important of the cities, in the Gullet, which is a name I use a lot for some reason. Um, you've got Pentalia, the biggest and most important. South of that is Orica, Salica, and then that's all of them. Yes. And so these were basically cities established to kind of anchor the frontier regions. And then once the Delian Empire fell apart, following a large invasion from the nomadic Mongol-based Gorians. I shouldn't say Mongol-based, more Scythian kind of based or Turkic Iranian based. I've kind of merged a lot of cultures into them. Um, I really based them off of heptalites, but then I decided I didn't really have enough to base them off of, so I merged in other parts from other other parts of history. And so, yeah, you can see that in there. Um, so yeah, so these cities were all established. And then let's see what I should talk about next. In the time that since the fall of the Delian Empire, they've kind of managed to maintain a small hold on the continent, but they are pretty isolationist, stay inside their little peninsula here. Um, I'll go more into detail in each of the individual countries' history later. Um, so besides Pentalia and Delia, there are s- pretty much a bunch of different ethnic groups. Well, I was talking about free cities. I guess I should deal with the other ones. So, when during the fall of the Delian Empire, men came in from the north, kind of a end of Rome type situation. And they formed several new kingdoms when they took over older civilizations, one of which was Brandica, um, another was Orica, and the last being Salica, which is kind of unique. So Brandica, I've tried to make Gothic based. So using Visigothic names for leaders like Eutharic, Roderick, and those kinds of names. They are a large naval power. Most of their foreign policy is spent invading Cartessos, which is this country to the south, and they have a lot of dealings with the Amber Men, who are people that I have not really spent much time developing, but I just thought that was a cool concept based on kind of the northern Baltic, or I guess southern Baltic coast around Lithuania, where amber is kind of used to be a big industry that could bring in a lot of wealth. Um, all right. So, probably the most important country to Pentalian history is Orica, which is this country right here. Orica is very German based. They are very, very, very strong, very military oriented, and they're called that name, of course, because I base them on gold. They have a lot of gold in these mountain regions over here, and that kind of makes them rich. They spend a lot of time warring with the Pentalians, but also at some points in their history, they ally. Orica even conquers Pentalia for a time before being driven back. And they also kind of have a hold over Salica, which isn't always the case and isn't the case in the kind of basic time. But in the future, they've pretty much merged into one entity. And that's because in between, it's hard to tell on this map that I just drew out in a couple seconds, but there are a lot of mountains in this area. Pantalia's border on the north, pretty much all mountains and all along this side. And then in the east, it's all grassy plains, all the way until you reach Cartessos again. There's mountains again. And Grandica, where there's again more mountains. It's a very mountainous decided world. And then there's mountains all along the east coast of Orica and Salica, kind of dividing them off from the continental interior. And again, mountains all along the southern part of Cassindaria, but importantly, not in between Cassindaria and Salica. So basically, um, there is this big division between Orica and Pentalia. They constantly have to fight over these small mountain forts, but Orica can easily go south and fight with the Salicans. And so that kind of leads them to be more culturally attached than the Brandigans, who are their cultural cousins. Right. Um, then I guess we'll move on to Salica. Salica are a very Republican type country. They formed kind of out of a merger between the invading men and the Delians that lived in cities. Sorry, that lived in cities. And they kind of formed power sharing agreements and like a heterogeneous society that really lasted. Um, they haven't been very developed in my mind, partially because they are so heavily dominated by Orica, and partially because of another problem that I'll bring up later. Um, yeah, all right. Cassandaria to the south here is a very Macedonian-based country. They've got two capitals, Asteria and Cassandropolis, and that's pretty much it. They spend a lot of time warring to the north into Salica because they don't really have much of a natural border, and they have a lot of influence over Delian politics. But they're mostly rivals. They're equal strength countries, and so it would, I guess you shouldn't say influence, but they're a big impact on them. Um, and then finally, there's the rest of these are minor, since I've pretty much described them. Vulhenos is kind of like a red square of country. I have not really decided what I'm gonna do here. This is kind of with a bigger problem, kind of with Salica, where it's I really haven't decided what I'm gonna do with the interior of this map. I've spent years developing the outside and all the history of the outside. I really haven't decided anything on the inside. And so they've just been left. They are Spanish based and they sometimes influence Delian history and particularly Spartoi history, which is a breakaway region of Delia. But that's all I can say. Next, got Giannia. Giannia are very interesting because when I decided to make Delia Greek instead of Roman, I thought it would be really funny if I added in kind of this country that's kind of shaped like the northern areas of Greece and just make it all about Italian culture. And so they're kind of Italian slash Etruscan based city states that kind of just exist. They have a lot of Delian influence now, and a lot of Genie's characters play like a major role in a lot of the little stories I've developed because they serve as mercenaries in other states and yeah, but as a political entity, they don't really exist. Finally, I'll talk about, I guess, I already talked about the Gorians a little, but there are other things in Goria, which I can go into a little detail in. There are like Delian traders along the coast, the Samakids. There is a like, Indian-based civilization to the south. Um, and then over here, this is kind of a dead zone because I've tried out a bunch of different ideas here. Originally, there was an Indian-based civilization here that would be raided by the Gorians, and I thought that would be like an interesting little touch, like a kind of Indian bait peninsula shaped nomadic kind of steppe. And then when you go off into the area in our world that kind of looks like Baluchistan, southern Iran, there's just like lush, deltas, and really vastly populated areas swimming with riches. And it didn't really pan out. So I set up a couple different places. At one point, there was a Delian-based civilization called Cardamom around here. Um, I still haven't really decided what I'm going to do there. So yeah, then I've been rambling. So I'll try to wrap these other ones up quick. Um, let's see. I'll do Thessalia. Thessalia is actually pretty important. I should have talked about them when I talked about Pentalia, but Thessalia are this little mountain civilization up here, based around a city called Liliana. Which I should draw. Um, so the Thessalians are like Slavic-based civilization that kind of just like lives in these mountain valleys. Um, they have a lot to do with Pentalia because they were originally part of this larger group that lived all along certain regions. Um, basically from the north of the Pentalian. Oop, this is not working. From the inner circles of Pentalia all the way out into like this kind of grassy plain area. But they were defeated by the Pentalians in war and kind of got resettled into just living in this one valley. And eventually they'll have all their lands taken over by Pentalia. Um, the Thessalia doesn't really have much agency, given that, they are very isolated. But they do play Orica and Pentalia off each other and have some pretty big roles in some pretty big important events. And then finally, this one is Cartessos, which is something I've been thinking about for a while. Cartessos is basically just very ambiguously based. They have a major city called Grand Cartessos, which is kind of like this giant uh canal almost entering into the ocean. They basically based around a single river in between two mountain ranges. And they are probably my most original kind of civilization. A lot of the other ones I based off of culture. Cartessos, I wasn't really sure. So you can see little elements from Egypt, little elements. They originally called Cartessos because of Tartessos, which was a, you know, Iberian civilization. But yeah, they I'm trying to do more with them. Oh, and I forgot to even draw on this little map. There are two other countries that are kind of in debate where I'm at. I've kind of decided whether or not to keep them in. Three, I guess. There is here, Cheops. It's basically a very Egyptian-based kind of remnant. They were part of a larger empire. The empire withdrew, and now they're kind of left to their own devices. Um, and so they kind of have to sit around. They don't really have a place in my story anymore because they were originally developed when Delia was meant to be very Egyptian based. Kind of, I had thoughts of like a really cool Mesopotamian empire stretching across the world, or Egyptian empire, and then it never really worked out. And so they're kind of left off. I haven't decided whether to keep them in or not. The North is also what was originally supposed to be an English-based civilization that I never really got around to naming. I called it Constantia or Georgia, depending on what I was talking about, or which time period I was talking about. They never really got fleshed out either. And then finally to the north of them, in a kind of spiral shaped shape like that, on the tip of that island, is a country that I call Admetia. I still want to keep them in, even if I take Georgians out. They're very Scotland-based or civilization, and their story is they're basically being pushed back by the Georgians into like this long peninsula. And they're kind of fighting a losing battle until this big event happens, which I won't talk about now because I've been rambling for a long time. All right, so um, if somebody's actually watching this, I hope you liked it. I'm just a person talking about his ideas. I don't have a microphone. I don't have any cool editing or anything. But I hope somebody watched this point, and yeah, have a nice day.